Welcome to Waking Up America, the not morning show. Today's news, Kari Lake may have some good news ahead. A poll shows that 50% of Democrats are still masking their children, and Elon Musk says gain-of-function research in Wuhan was bioweapon research. Let's talk about this while we still can, because more than likely we're going to get banned off of YouTube for this, but let's get into it. I am your host, Alexander Graves, the constitutional conservative perspective of the night. And this is my co-host, Devin Adler. He is the half-assed libertarian, also Zoomer. If you enjoy this content, please consider following us on Twitter at America Wake Up. And if you would like to further support this content, we would greatly appreciate it if you would donate any cups of coffee or even subscribe on there for anywhere from 5, 10, honestly, however many cups you want to buy. We do appreciate that, so head on over to buymeacoffee.com/wakeup. Let's go ahead and get into the first story here. This is actually very, very important, and I don't think people are really analyzing why, so I'll go ahead and get into it here. Kari Lake celebrates Georgia judge ordering new election. So the former gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake is calling attention to a recent ruling in Georgia that ordered a new election after officials identified a number of systemic irregularities that potentially impacted the results, just days after she lost her own effort to overturn the result in Arizona or hold a new election in Maricopa County. Now, like I said, people are definitely minimizing this. It's like, why is she liking this? This doesn't make sense. She lost. Like, why would she be pushing this up? She's just pushing up fringe and radical elements. Screven County, where several candidates filed a lawsuit alleging incorrect ballots were issued to at least 24 voters, potentially altering the outcome of a county commission race decided by just 7 votes. Voters of a certain district were effectively disenfranchised from the vote in their home district, an argument Lake made after up to 1,000 Arizona voters were provided with incorrect ballots in early voting in the fall in Arizona. So this is where they kind of compare here. The judge in Georgia ultimately ordered a new election in Screven County. So why is this important? This sets precedent. So because Katie Hobbs failed to go after Kari Lake and prevent her from pushing this to a higher court, she is going to be able to take this to a higher court, and this sets precedent, which is great if it gets up to the Supreme Court, because they can look at the precedents like, okay, have other counties done this in the past? What are you drinking?
Don't worry about it.
All right.
What about you next time?
we're gonna come back to that. All right. No, this sets a great precedent, because the Supreme Court can look at this and they can now rule in Kari Lake's favor and say, okay, well, this election that had less irregularities was called for a re-election, even though it is a smaller vote. The fact that Kari Lake will be bringing this case up to the Supreme Court gives her a lot of ammo. I'm excited for this. I'm very curious to see where this goes. And actually, I think this makes me a little bit more optimistic, just with the way that the Supreme Court usually is leaning lately. I think we could potentially see a re-election here, but we'll see. Your thoughts?
I mean, big W for the courts. And I think that you're right about the precedent thing. I think this definitely tells other people in other congressional districts and in other states, like, hey, if some fishy stuff went down in the election and we all know it, you have a voice, you have an option, take it to the courts. I feel like this is going to kind of open up a lot of election integrity cases, which is ultimately for the better.
Yeah, I mean, one can only hope. I mean, unfortunately, our legal system is usually jammed up with this, so I don't know if it's going to get to that point in time, but we'll see. I mean, it's just crazy that all of these irregularities and stuff can be pointed out during this election season, and just nothing's done about it. Absolutely nothing. They don't. It just continues. So that is a little bit of Kari Lake news. Before we get into the rest of these stories, I will try to keep you guys abreast of the situation with Kari Lake to the best of my ability. Moving on. This next story is very troublesome. So, a poll shows that Democrats still overwhelmingly support masking toddlers. I don't know if you've seen a toddler get a mask put on them, or if you've ever tried to put a mask on a 2-year-old. They don't like it. They know it's wrong inherently. Let's go ahead and dig into this article. Scientific studies have since revealed the adverse impact that masks have on toddlers, particularly on their communication skills, the relative unlikelihood of children becoming severely ill from the virus, and the potential inefficacy of masks as a means to directly stop transmission. So this is one of the biggest things for me that really annoys me with this. They are screwing over the next generation so bad. You have these kids who grew up during COVID between, the age of 2 and 5, who are now getting up into school and they can't speak properly because the number one way that children learn how to speak is they mimic. They watch the way that your mouth moves to enunciate things. That's how they learn their words. So when you speak like this with your hand in front of your face and you can't see what they're saying and you're only looking at their eyes, one, you're hiding a lot of emotion because a lot of emotion comes from the face. And if you're seeing the eye and you're smiling, you can barely even tell I'm smiling. Or am I frowning? Smiling? Frowning. It's one of those things for children that puts them so far behind. Any thoughts on this?
I mean, what you're saying is probably not through and through untrue. It might be a little inflammatory.
What part?
But I mean, I don't necessarily think that it's going to affect these children like severely.
Well, it already has. There's scientific data that points to it now that these kids are actually well behind in their speech going into 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade. Now, will they catch up? Possibly. But I think there's other ramifications to this too, where these parents keep them sheltered and feared. And we know that sheltered children don't usually join society very well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested to see how that sort of plays out in the future. I think they're probably overreacting at the very least. It's, scientific data that like young children, unless they're infants, are not gonna, they're not going to be seriously affected by this virus. They're not going to die. They're not going to have severe health effects. In my opinion, at the very most, it's a little overcautious.
It's over the top.
I'd be interested to see like if this truly does kind of developmentally affect these children in the future. But I'm not gonna.
I mean, children learn from each other all the time. They learn. So if one's speaking and the other one doesn't know how to speak it, they'll kind of learn from each other. So same thing with the mask. If they can't see the other child speaking, they're going to be developmentally behind children that don't wear masks. So let's plug into the article a little bit here because you brought up a good point and we'll get to it in here. Issues and Insights in partnership with TIPP asked 1,351 American adults earlier this month, is it a good idea or bad idea to put masks on children under the age of 5 to deal with COVID? Now, this isn't about colds and sneezing and stuff like that. This is specifically about COVID. There was a stark contrast between responses when factoring in respondents' political affiliations. A majority of Democrats, 56%, reckon that masking kids under the age of 5 is a good idea. Only 24% of Republicans and 31% of independents thought it was a worthwhile endeavor. This to me is terrifying that even 24% of Republicans think it's a good idea to mask children against a virus that is not lethal to children. And we have data in this article to back that up. On the flip side, 58% of Republicans and 38% of independents think that masking toddlers is a bad idea, whereas only 24% of Democrats think that to be the case. So you have presumably, another, 20, almost 30% of Democrats who aren't sure. So they're on the fence. They don't know. So when respondents were grouped by ideology rather than party, there was a similar divide. 56% of conservatives thought it was a bad idea. 31% of alleged conservatives supported the initiative. I'm not sure how they measured that. Liberals, again, majoritively, 54% supported covering children's faces. So the good news, this comes from Tufts Children's Hospital in Boston, Dr. Daniel Rauch. Good news continues to be that COVID-19 is not a common problem for kids. COVID-19 survival rate in children approximately 99.995%. And I'm sure there's outliers that with comorbidities and whatnot. That the fact that we're still masking kids this far into the COVID-19 pandemic situation is insane to me because, I mean, you barely even see COVID anymore. You've got the flu, the common cold. But I just cannot see how people can justify this still at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Part of me wants to say that, like, if you want to mask your kid, I can't stop you. I don't have any authority in the matter. It's not my place to say. But if there is legitimate data to support that it's developmentally affecting these children, like on a moral sense, like yeah, that's probably not something you should be doing. But I'm curious to know, like, what legislatively would be your solution to this problem, because that's where I think you and I are going to differ a lot. Like,
I
yeah,
don't think it's something that you can legislate. I think you just need to educate. That's important. Not everything can be solved with legislation, Mr. Libertarian.
well,
Mr. I want more laws.
No, that's kind of what I was getting at, where it's like it's another kind of just an unenforceable law. Like, if kids are going to mask their kids up, or parents are going to mask their kids up, then if say we write a law that says no, under 6 or under 7 can't mask your kid. Like, what are we going to do? Start kicking doors down?
Yes.
I mean, we can all point at these people and laugh and go, haha, you're stupid, you're an idiot. But ultimately, like, I don't understand, like, what the angle is here. Like, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah. Okay, so we have some data here I'll pull up. This is from Daily Mail. So COVID rules are blamed for 23% dive in young children's development. Disturbing study shows scores in 3 key cognitive tests slumped between 2018 and 2021, with face mask rules among possible culprits. Now, causation correlation could be anything. It could be the fact that a lot of these kids were kept out of school, homeschooling, etc., or internet schooling, but they do see at least some link in this with the face mask rules. If I had more time to dig into it, I'll pull up more data sources on it later. I'm sure somebody's done a scientific study on it. But, I mean, at the very least, I don't think interfering with the children's ability to speak and see and communicate with other kids is good for their socialization. It's kind of like playing with a kid in a bubble.
And we agree on that for sure. Ultimately it's overkill. It's unnecessary, unless there's some sort of like prior health effects. Unless there is a reason other than just COVID-19 that you're masking up your toddler, I don't think you need to. But also, I don't think it's really my place to say.
So, from the libertarian perspective, the parent has outright full authority over the child, no matter what.
Absolutely, yes. Because we just talked about precedents, right? So if we're gonna set the precedent that, say we write a law that says you cannot mask your child under this certain age, what precedent does that set? Let's say in a not friendly administration gets into office and they expand on that law. Once you have that foot in the door, that's all you need. And all of a sudden, you can't parent your kid at all. Like, what kind of precedent are we setting there if we're going to start legislating how parents are going to raise their kids?
So if a parent's abusing their child, do they have the outright authority to do that?
So abuse is different, and I think that's a bad faith argument, because I think you and I both know that that's a different case. You have the right to parent your child, but you have no right to abuse them.
Okay, so we don't have outright authority over our kids. Now, there is a slippery slope argument to be had there, but I'm not arguing that we should take these kids away from these people, but it is a form of child abuse to be forcing this on a kid sometimes. We're going to have to see when the data comes out. I mean, I guess we'll agree to disagree here, but I think it will be very interesting to see how the chickens come home to roost on this topic specifically. And we're going to see years down the line how this affects us.
That's pretty much, to me, that's all COVID news in general. There's some like fringe cases of like vaccine. What's the word I'm looking for here? Vaccine side effects. Thank you. In the short term, but ultimately it's going to be kind of interesting to see how that affects people in the long term. How it's going to affect their lifespan. How it's going to affect them when they get elderly. Like, ultimately, we're just going to have to kind of sit and wait a lot of this out.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting...
I'm definitely interested to see what comes of this whole pandemic in the future.
Yeah. I think what's interesting here is that, you're going to have the kids after So you have the kids that were just before being masked, and then you're going to have the kids just before. So you're going to have data sets on both sides of this generation of kids that were masked and otherwise locked down during COVID, and see how they developmentally, proceed. It will be interesting. So a little bit more into COVID-19 here, because we're going to get into it hopefully fairly heavily here. This is just a short little clip of a double-vaxxed, respected Norwegian clinical psychologist. I'm gonna butcher this name, Silji Shevig, calls for a complete suspension of the COVID mRNA jabs because of clear evidence of more harm than good. To me, this spells out that the tide is finally turning. She says, "We've all been fooled, but we must show kindness to each other despite previous disagreements." This is due to the increased transparency now regarding endocarditis and myocarditis amongst young adults. All of these athletes just dropping dead randomly. The fibrous clots that we can't discuss on YouTube, but you can look into it under Suddenly Died. It's a documentary. You should watch it. Just gonna watch this real quick.
Hello, my name is Silje Skjevik, and I am a clinical psychologist from Norway. I have been deeply concerned about the way people have been ostracized for being unvaccinated the past 3 years. People have experienced discrimination, threats, and even exclusion from their professional lives. I was one of those who genuinely believed.
So, I just want to play a little bit of that. I think it's what's really going to be interesting is I really want to see more lawsuits from people who lost their jobs over this for not getting vaccinated. I know that was an extreme fear of mine, as well as several other people I know, that they were going to lose their jobs because they didn't want to get vaccinated and didn't trust it. And now with all this data coming out, I mean, you effectively tore the country in two. You turned us into the others if you were unvaccinated. I'm glad to see the tide turning here. I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see if it's enough, but I mean, with another wave of potentially COVID coming, we'll see what happens. I'm sure the left is going to continue to push this authoritarian narrative on us. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's also important to point out, not only was it like a fear of loss of job, but I know I personally lost friends over the whole vaccine thing. I got accused of being an anti-vaxxer from some leftist friends who I prefer not to talk to anymore because I told them I didn't want the COVID vaccine.
Polio was great.
Yeah, and they were like, "Oh, you must be anti-vax." So I was like, "Well, hang on. I have every single other vaccine available on the market, but the COVID vaccine. The reason why I skipped out on that one is the COVID vaccine's only been in the oven for about 4 months, maybe 5, when they started rolling it out."
Yeah, and
like polio, for example, that vaccine has been developed for like 150 years. People have got the vaccine, lived and died healthy lives after having received the vaccine. Yeah, I don't know exactly how long it's been. I think it was.
I'm just looking it up because that doesn't sound right. Polio vaccine.
Yeah. Either way, so,
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Most vaccines, it was. Okay, it was in 1953 by Jonas Salk. 7 years, still plenty of data and research there.
Still, I lied. Sue me.
No. I just wanted to get. It was bugging me. I was like 1850. That doesn't sound right. Okay, so that being said, there's a lot of truth there to what you said. Usually 10 to 15 years is the normal for vaccines because they have time to study the after effects of what exactly happens. We push this into people, and now they are unfortunately the lab rats, and we're going to see over the next 10, 15 years what kind of side effects that has. Myocarditis, endocarditis, who knows what else. Potentially those fibrous clots, we're going to probably increasingly see that, because here's the thing. mRNA was new technology at the point. This was not what they usually used for vaccines. You have these vaccines that use CRISPR technology, which is gene sequencing, and the Cas9 protein, which they program to target that specific COVID cell in your DNA and mRNA. So it goes in and it kills that. We know absolutely nothing about the human body. It doesn't matter what we think we know. We continue to discover these new things and these other things that are wrong. There's a new study recently where they said that X-rays now damage your bones. It's like we know absolutely nothing. And we're going to get hit with karma on this for sure. So the fact that they did this mass push and push this out on people instead of just letting people get naturally vaccinated is very dangerous. But that being said, let's get into this news story here. Elon says that gain-of-function research in Wuhan was bioweapon research. The function referred is death. This was in response to a tweet where somebody called out Fauci and said, Fauci bypassed the moratorium on gain-of-function research to fund dangerous projects like EcoHealth Alliance's work in Wuhan. He then worked internally to change NIH's definition of gain-of-function to evade culpability. In 2022, he awarded more money to Peter Daszak for more gain-of-function research. I mean, we saw how he lied in front of Congress as well, to which Elon Musk responded, gain-of-function should be called bioweapon research as the function referred as death. What was the name changed to this time? Okay, gain-of-function should be called bioweapon research. The Twitter CEO points to a Yahoo News article from last year that unearthed a paper that Fauci wrote a decade ago where he argues that the benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the potential pandemic risk. Oops. In an unlikely but conceivable turn of events, what if scientists become infected with the virus, which leads to an outbreak and ultimately triggers a pandemic? Fauci asked in 2012 paper. Boy, that was not far behind. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. Your thoughts on Fauci?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that any level-headed individual in the country likes him, just in general. Generally speaking, the American public doesn't like being lied to, especially on, the Congress floor. As far as, how this specifically pertains to the article, yeah, I think that Elon has a point. Gain of function is a little misleading.
It's weaponizing viruses.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm a little curious why that's even something worth researching.
So maybe I do know the answer to that. I don't necessarily agree with it. The reason that they weaponize these viruses, or rather they evolve and mutate them, is to see if they can create a vaccine essentially to that particular strain if it was to mutate in that direction. The problem is they were doing it in communist China, which we're going to get into. But I mean, no matter what your opinion on Fauci is, I'm just going to pull up a really quick video here of Fauci. This is, I believe this is back in the 80s, where he basically said that you can get AIDS just by being around a family member.
Starting to see, as we're seeing virtually as the months go by, other groups that can be involved, and seeing it in children is really quite disturbing.
When you say other close contact, give me some examples.
Well, for example, if the close contact of a child is a household contact, perhaps there will be a certain number of cases of individual who are just living with and in close contact with someone with AIDS or at risk of AIDS, who does not necessarily have to have intimate sexual contact or share a needle, but just the ordinary close contact that one sees in normal interpersonal relationships.
So Fauci basically believed that you would catch AIDS just by sitting next to a family member on the couch. This is why the AIDS pandemic was so insane and people were going crazy. This guy has been historically wrong and historically lied to the American people. This shouldn't come as any surprise. And further corruption in this article. So Christine Grady is the head of the bioethics at the National Institute of Health, where she is the person who is supposed to make sure that Fauci behaves ethically. That's his wife. Yeah, so the corruption's pretty deep here. And before we go a little bit deeper into here, gain of function is incredibly dangerous to the human race because of what happens in Wuhan. And I have a separate theory, I think, for most people on this, but I think it bears fruit considering how it all played out.
Some might call it a conspiracy.
I do need my tinfoil hat for this one. Yeah, I definitely need my tinfoil hat for this one, but I argue, yes, it was being developed as a bioweapon by China, but they released it too early. They did not perfect it, and they did not mean to release it on their own people or population, at least not yet. And that's basically my theory, because there's really no reason for these people to be doing this overseas in a communist country and giving the communists a tool to do this. We know China wants us destroyed, so you're teaching them how to manufacture a bioweapon against one of the United States' main enemies. This is ludicrous to me. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like the whole gain of function research thing is just kind of a weird, like, no, right? We watch these like apocalyptic post-pandemic movies, and like this is how it all starts.
This is how it always starts.
Yeah,
Some scientists
like,
working
it's
on
just-
some super hyper Ebola zombie virus. I mean, what was the CDC came out, I think in, I don't know, 2018. I don't know the day. You'd have to look it up. But they basically said, like, yeah, we could create a zombie virus. It's like, great. Awesome. That's what I want to hear. I'm so glad somebody's probably working on that right now. They're like, yeah, all we need to do is mix some Ebola with some rabies. And it's just like, guys, please. Can we just live our lives? Like, you don't need to help nature make us extinct. All right, we got this. We'll do it ourselves. We have nukes for this. Okay. True. So there is, and by the way, the fact that they're even mentioning that the virus originated in a Wuhan lab used to be a conspiracy theory. In the beginning of COVID-19, this was a conspiracy theory. It was initially reported, and then everybody shot it down like, no, it can't be that. Because you know what that would mean? That means that you would have to hold China accountable. So now that people they're not simmering with rage, they're like, oh, well, yeah, actually, maybe it was. But, it's too far gone now. We can't investigate it. And mind you, the NIH, which is heavily invested with the CCP, basically came out and says, no, it's fine. No, it definitely didn't come in Wuhan. It's like, great, I'm gonna believe the NIH. All right. There is mounting evidence pointing to the fact that COVID-19 virus originated from a leak in the Wuhan lab, despite insistence from the government and from Fauci himself that this was not the case. It was revealed earlier this year that many scientists in Britain and the United States were more concerned about keeping international harmony than with opening the debate regarding the lab leak theory. This is why globalism is terrible, because we do not hold these people accountable for their actions. There should have been sanctions on China. We should have driven their economy down into the gutter when we had the chance. Now, essentially, we've screwed ourselves because they're getting off of the US dollar, which we covered in another episode as well. But that is where we are right now. And
I'm really happy to hear you say that globalism is cringe.
Yeah. There's a lot of cringe things in this episode, unfortunately. Speaking of cringe things, ex-Twitter employees had a Fauci fan club Slack group. Slack, if you don't know, is the inter-office communication where you can create custom channels. And they had a Fauci fan group. That is incredibly cringe, as the Zoomers say. So Elon Musk revealed this in a tweet on Tuesday evening that former Twitter employees unironically ran an internal Slack group titled Fauci Fan Club in support of Dr. Anthony Fauci. It is a cult. I mean, the divide is insane, and they've created a cult here. Musk replied by posting a link to a Newsweek article titled Fauci was untruthful to Congress about Wuhan lab research, new documents appear to show. Fauci argued benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the pandemic risk in a 2012 paper, which we covered. Musk argued that gain-of-function research is just another way of saying bioweapon. Important to note that Fauci authored the 2012 paper, which we covered. Musk replied again to Twitter, revealed, despite these glaring issues, Twitter nonetheless had an internal Slack channel unironically called the Fauci Fan Club. Oh, that makes me want to vomit. So... there was in the latest filing of the Twitter files, which I would cover, but it's very lengthy, how Twitter rigged the COVID debate by censoring info that was true but inconvenient to the US government, discrediting doctors and other experts who disagreed, and suppressing ordinary users, including some sharing the CDC's own data. This is incredibly important because this happened all throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Doctors and people were coming out saying, oh, hey, we found this medicine. It actually might work. We've had some good results. I'm a doctor, the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Hey, this might work. And they just shut them down. It's like, oh, no, you're a conspiracy theorist. It can't work. And then 2 years later, they're like, oh, yeah, actually, this medicine that you mentioned you were completely canceled for. Yeah, it did work pretty well. So you hate to see it.
Yeah, that's a pretty terrible precedent to set. Hopefully we don't see any more deadly viruses in the future, because we're pretty screwed if we do. It's pretty clear that our legislators really don't have the American public's best interest in mind. It's all just virtue signaling.
No.
So, I feel like we got fairly lucky with COVID. You know, it could have been far worse.
Well, so
Hopefully this wasn't a dry run. Hopefully this isn't.
you mean for a worse virus?
Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? Viruses have to they have to balance. Okay, they have to balance their lethality and what is it? Essentially their transmissibility between people, and then different delay time. So the worst one would be something that's highly transmissible and highly deadly, but it has a lag time, which more than likely would be developed in a lab. Maybe one in Wuhan, who knows? So
see, now you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah. Well, so that's the thing with like Ebola, right? Ebola is contagious and super deadly, but it doesn't usually go out of very far because it's very obvious. Like, hey, this person is bleeding. I probably shouldn't be near them. But yeah, so certain viruses have different things like that that make them less scary and whatnot. But I think yeah, like corona type viruses. So coronavirus is something that's transmissible from animals to humans, are particularly dangerous because we usually don't have a defense. They're called novel or new viruses. So we don't usually have an immune response to them. So they usually hit us hard like COVID did. But now, as you see with the COVID strains, it's going down and down and down and down in severity because we're building up this immunity to the main strain and so much. So your body naturally will target those gene sequences of those viruses and disable them. Okay, enough nerd talk. Speaking of COVID some more here, and China, it all ties together. The US is to impose new restrictions on travelers from China amid COVID outbreak. So China, which is, I believe, 95% vaccinated, is now breaking out again with COVID. Beginning January 5th, all air passengers at least 2 years old originating from China will be required to show a negative COVID-19 test no more than 2 days before the departure from China, Hong Kong, or Macau. But the Chinese government has virtually stopped reporting any outbreak data on this, and they're covering it up as usual. I mean, we saw them lock people in buildings and burn them alive, so we know this happens. They are great at locking this stuff down. Officials said that they do not know the true infection rate or number of deaths and hospitalizations in China. There's been a lot of footage coming out. I probably should have brought it up, but of just them just being overloaded right now in their hospitals. So are you ready for COVID round 2?
No.
You sure?
No, I'm definitely not ready. I am very glad that I'm an essential worker because job loss is pretty unfortunate, and it's a consequence of these pandemics.
Honestly, I mean, the goal of a bioweapon, if you're going to use it as a bioweapon, is to take out as much of the population as possible. But I think even with their botched attempt with this bioweapon, they caused irreparable harm to the United States. They destroyed our economy, they divided our people, they corrupted our youth, and they allowed the communists to take over. I think this is only going to get worse from here. I think this is further into their plan. I am a extreme anti-communist, and I hate China. So we're going to get into some China news here because I'm passionate about it. I hate China. They're communists, and you should hate them too. Chinese fighter jet threatens American aircraft in international airspace, prompting evasive maneuvers. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command issued a release on Thursday noting that a Chinese Navy J-11 fighter pilot came dangerously close to the USAF aircraft on December 21 during an intercept over the South China Sea. The communist jet flew in front of and within 20 feet of the nose of the RC-135. So this is a spy plane. We are flying in international waters in the South China Sea. That is international territory. No dispute there. A Chinese Shenyang J-16 pulled up to an Australian P-8A Poseidon recon plane, then released flares and chaff, which is tiny pieces of aluminum. According to the Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles, some chaff was sucked into the Australian aircraft's engines, which could have been debilitating. Why is this important? Okay, this is over what is known throughout the world as international waters in the South China Sea. China does not see it that way because by international law, everything within 50 miles of your border is technically your country. So China thought about this and they said, what if we just build islands? So next article here, I'm going to pull this up. This is footage. I'm sorry, photographs from satellites and from these spy planes over the South China Sea. New images have emerged showing airfields and other structures on some of China's artificial islands in the South China Sea that the U.S. said have been fully militarized. China knows what they're doing. This is a 100-year war for them. They are 100% at war with us. It may not be a hot war, but they want to destroy us. They want to destroy our way of life. They are corrupting our politicians, and they're coming after our people. Okay. Flights near a number of reefs and rocks that China has claimed and turned into military bases with radar stations, airstrips, and artillery stations, installations. They are weaponizing these islands, and they know, due to the international law that I explained, if they put an island there, everything within 50 miles is legally, by international law, their territory. So they know that they can continue to expand out and they can create these little nests. During World War II, some of the worst fighting happened on these small islands with Japan. It would be the same way in World War III. This is the more concerning part as well. A new type of building was spotted on Fiery Cross, as well as on Mischief and Subai Reefs. It's a garage-like structure that may be sheltering missile launchers, according to analysts. My guess is that the sea-facing garages are angled for cruise missile launchers to be used to house, service, and rapidly deploy launchers used for to fire surface-to-air, anti-ship, or surface-to-surface missiles. So if we get into a war with China, we're moving our navy anywhere near there, there will be missiles, anti-ship missiles, coming from these islands, directly striking our carrier groups, directly striking our battleships and cruisers. And we covered an article a couple days ago where, I mean, they're actively testing with Russia these anti-carrier missiles. They are preparing for a hot war with us, and we need to be prepared. All right. Radomes, gun turrets, and close-in weapon systems for detecting and destroying incoming missiles and aircraft are common features on all of the artificial islands. And this is the part that gets me. In 2015, so this was 7 years ago. Okay, I'm telling you, this is how China thinks. They don't think in these 8-year cycles like we do with presidencies. They are thinking in 100-year. On a trip to Washington in 2015, China's leader Xi Jinping, Winnie the Pooh, said that China does not intend to pursue militarization of the artificial islands in the South China Sea, but critics say they greatly expand the offensive capability of the PLA, which is China's army, and threaten our other countries in the vicinity. Of course they lied to us. China is always lying to us. I don't know why people fall for this. We need to take a hard stance on China. We need to look at them and embrace them as the true enemy of the United States, and we need to start preparing. Your thoughts, Mr. Libertarian?
I would say cool on the warmongering a little bit.
No. I said prepare defensively.
If you want to go fight China, you should be the first one on the front line, frankly.
I didn't say an offensive war. I said we should start preparing defensively. We need to start
a defensive war in the South China Sea, huh?
No.
How does that work?
No. We need to start preparing them, fighting them on an informational basis. We need to start fighting them on a tech basis. We need to start fighting them on everything but the hot war up till that point, and only to that point.
You also mentioned how disastrous it would be if these garage sites on these artificial islands are harboring cruise missiles.
Correct. Yes, because we actively patrol those seas.
Why?
Why do we actively patrol them? I don't know. That's another argument for another day. But that being said, it will only take China like a flip of a switch to just annihilate our navy.
You know whose problem it wouldn't be if we didn't police the world? It wouldn't be our problem. If China wants to put
when the world seeks
missile sites in the South China Sea, it wouldn't be our problem if we just weren't in the South China Sea.
It would be when they come to our doorstep, because when the world senses weakness, when a world power topples, it usually gets pounced on and trounced on by the rest of the world. This happens throughout history. China would be the exact same. And let me ask you this. Who do you think is a better representative of a world power in the world? Do you think it would be us, or do you think it would be the communist Chinese?
Definitely us. That's a pretty obvious question.
So if China engages in a war with us, that at that point is a defensive war. That is us defending ourselves. China is 100% going to take the initiative and attack us. I think we need to bolster and discourage them from doing so before we are ready to take that on. because I think it is going that way, that direction. I think they're going to continue expanding until they have these islands literally off the coast of California, and they're just skipping their way straight to us.
So what if we spend all of our military budget on defending our border instead?
I think there's a
What
lot
we're
better
gonna do?
government. I think there's a lot better government agencies that we can liquidate to spend money on reinforcing our border, like the ATF, the FBI, the CAA, the NSA. Put all that
True.
power up into NORAD and up into our defense around the
So-
country.
I'm not ready for global war.
But it's
I
coming,
don't
whether
know.
we want it or not. World War III is on the horizon, unfortunately.
You're right, but
Unfortunately.
there's no reason why. Okay, so like World War I and II, were we front runners in those battles?
So World War One, that one we supplied them with rations that we actually invented, the military ration and the shotgun, which is ironic because I got a small little caveat here. During World War One, the Germans tried to accuse us of war crimes because we brought shotguns while they were dropping nerve gas. And they were like, the shotguns, they're too strong. You can't do them, because we would just go in there with the slam fire shotguns right down the trench.
America has become incredibly successful on being an isolationist power. We only joined in World War One because there was growing pro Germany sentiment in the population, and the Great Depression. Right, the Great Depression was pretty bad, and so the president was like, "Hey, you know what's great for the economy? War. Let's go to war."
Well,
right.
So
So-
actually, in World War II, one of the ways that we actually made a lot of money and got our economy back was not necessarily war, but it was selling warplanes and commissioning and leasing them to these other countries, which I have no problem with. If we're going to be isolationists and be out of war, we could sell the technology, as long as they're not going to use it on us. But the problem is they do. In today's society, they would just turn around and use it back on us. But that made us a lot of money and actually helped to get us out of the Great Depression.
Okay, you're right. But the point that I'm trying to make is America has become an incredibly strong nation and a world power on the foundation of isolationism. We've strayed away from that, and it's kind of cringe. We've kind of become, I guess, less fierce on the world stage than we used to. The Cold War kind of proved that.
Well, I agree with you. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. A lot of people would say that we actually came out of being isolationists at the start of World War II, where we got out of the Great Depression and then into, the booming, the baby boom and so on and so forth. Now, causation, correlation, who knows what specifically was the cause of that? I argue it was the Lend-Lease program, where we were leasing these things to boost our economy. But trading, at least internally, some experts would argue, did lead to the Great Depression.
What I'm saying is America became a great power in a great country on the foundation of isolationism. Isolationism is what the founding fathers want. You seem to be a pretty strict constitutionalist.
Yes,
They
I
were
did.
very, very, very for isolationism.
Mhm.
I think we need to get back to that, personally.
I don't disagree with you. I think we do. I think with the exception of trade, actually George Washington wanted us to be isolationists militarily unless necessary. So the Hammurabi pirates, for instance, he always believed that if we needed to act and our people were in trouble, we would act. So for instance, I think there was a letter to Thomas Jefferson that was sent. These sailors, these privateers were like, "Hey, can we have cannons?" And he's like, "Bro, we got the Second Amendment. Go ahead," because they were constantly being attacked by these Arab pirates. So I now, while I do appreciate the isolationism argument there, George Washington also said that we should, trade with the world. We should be an exporter, which we've had this discussion before. We don't export anymore, and I think that's a huge problem. And you agree with me? I'm perfectly fine with not having the military intervention all over the world, but I think there's a difference between when you're attacked and when you are attacking and making an excuse to attack somebody. But preemptive war, it's a hard argument.
So let me ask you this then. So we criticize gain of function research, and
Yep.
the reason why gain of function is a thing, the reason listed is because they are proactively creating stronger viruses to create better vaccines. So you and I criticize that and think that that's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Well, policing the world and fighting these foreign wars is the exact same thing, because the argument is
I'm with you there. I
it's
agree.
a counterterrorism measure. We're stopping the spread of communism, right? They're going on the basis of this is a preventative measure. We're looking toward the future, and we criticize that in gain of function research when it comes to viruses, but you seem to support that idea when it comes to global war.
Oh, I think you're kind of mischaracterizing what I was saying there. No, I was saying defensively prepare and operate anything but a hot war with China. So we need to do these tariffs and whatnot and go after them with sanctions and debilitate them beforehand, at the very least, as a final, absolute final step would be war, but it wouldn't be us initiating it. It would be us defensively preparing for China to attack us.
But don't you think that us imposing tariffs and like defensively building up for a hot war with China is in itself an act of war? That's what led us to what is happening today.
Don't you think the communists buying our politicians is an act of war?
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and switch to a better topic here, because we're going to go on and on for hours. That was a little intense. So speaking of communists and speaking of them attacking us, there is some effort to fight back against the communist machine, which is destroying this country. Proposal in Arizona would require parental consent for school workers to use pronouns that differ from a student's biological sex. All right, this is a Republican. John Kavanaugh is pushing a measure that would require parents to provide permission in order for school employees to refer to a student using pronouns that do not match that student's biological sex. An employee or independent contractor of a school district or charter school may not knowingly address, identify, or refer to a student who is under 18 years of age by a pronoun that differs from the pronoun that aligns with the student's biological sex, unless the school district or charter school receives written permissions from the student's parent. Quote, "Under my bill, you can call a person by a different pronoun, or you can even call the person by a name associated with the opposite biological gender, so long as the parents have given permission." To me, this is spineless republicanism again. And the article continues here. Somebody calls him out and says, it's incredibly disappointing that Senator-elect John Kavanaugh and his extremist allies have chosen to prioritize attacking children and their families as their first priority for this session. This guy is not an extremist. This is a moderate take here. I think it's a weak Republican take. I feel like it is just like giving them amnesty, where they continue to push the line further in their favor. We are ceding ground to the left here by just saying, oh, well, you can do it now. You can indoctrinate these children as long as they have parents' permission. And what's going to stop these parents from doing this? What penalties are set forth if they do this? We're just literally just ceding more ground to the left. Your thoughts? I know you might differ on this.
My thoughts on this article, I think this is a big W for society and for Republicans. I feel like that this is a good middle ground compromise between absolutely not allowing
bad takes.
No. Only good takes here. Only fire takes. Only big brain intellectual conversation. Anyway, I think that this is good. I think this is a good compromise between disallowing pronouns altogether and allowing it unrestricted. Having parental involvement, I think, is going to be really important moving forward in the future, because this is a lot of how the left gets away with indoctrinating children into this sort of thing, right? You have like a left-leaning teacher, and they start like preaching this to their students, and then the student can live a just complete double life at school with their friends than what they would actually do at home, because they know that their parents might not be approving of that sort of behavior. So having the parents, they have to intervene. They have to be informed about what their child is doing at school, which is ultimately a good thing. And I think it's a good middle ground. I think it's going to open up a conversation between parents and children, and figuring out, like, having an honest conversation. If your child would like to be referred to different pronouns and they're more comfortable being referred to different pronouns, and I like say I get a phone call from the school. Hey, your son would like to go by she, her pronouns. And it's like, all right. So I have a conversation with my kid. I'm like, what is influencing you to think that way? If it's friends and it's teachers, the answer is probably going to be no. I'm not going to sign that waiver. I think that's a bad move. I think you need to think about it a little bit more.
Your answer at that point should be, I'm taking my kid out of your school, because he's obviously being influenced by the teachers.
Yeah, but if you have an honest conversation with your kid, and this is coming from an honest place, and they've honestly thought about it themselves, there should be no reason to not sign the waiver if they genuinely are more comfortable. And of course, children can lie, which is why you need to kind of monitor. Especially
for the sake of argument, let's assume this is a 5-year-old.
No, okay, we've already been over this. When I say children, I don't mean like 5-year-old children. I'm saying like if I have a 16-year-old son that decides that this is the path he wants to go down,
that he wants to be a Caesar fish person.
We can certainly have that conversation, and that's again that gets into more why this is ultimately a W for parents, because young kids are stupid. I think we both. I think everybody in the audience, you and I, we all agree young kids are dumb. So if that phone call happens when my child is like 9 years old, no way in fucking hell, absolutely not. The end. Period. Nothing. But it's going to allow parents to be able to more closely monitor what's happening with their kid in school and know, like, if they decide that they want to go down a different path in life, know where that's coming from and make an educated decision whether or not you're going to support that. So
for clarification, this is in Arizona. I want to see, how is this enforceable though, is my question. This isn't going to, what this is more likely to do is it's going to lull these parents who leave their kids in public school into a false sense of security, because they've got their kid in school 8 hours a day. It's like, well, I never got that phone call. This must not be happening to them. And then they turn 18. They're like, yeah, I was convinced through this all from age 5 to 18. I don't think these teachers are going to contact the parents at all. I don't think that's a reality. I don't think this is enforceable unless you have somebody in there tattling on the teachers, which, let's be honest, it's a cult as well. Those teachers are all far leftist and they support each other. I don't think somebody's going to call them out to make this even an enforceable law. But the fact that they call it extremist is, to me, is us ceding ground to the left again. I mean, okay, so regarding the whole accountability argument, you're not wrong. You're absolutely not wrong. You're relying on a system of multiple people, a chain of command, so to speak, to actually hold these people accountable, which is why you as a parent need to be more involved in your child's schooling. Parent-teacher conferences exist for a reason. You can get a pretty solid read on the type of person somebody is if you just talk to them for about a half an hour. That's why parent-teacher conferences are important. That's why they've been a thing forever. And I don't know, this might just be like a personal anecdote. My parents never came to mine. My friends' parents never came to theirs. It was very, very, very rare that like parent-teacher conferences actually got attended by any like significant portion of the parents. Like we need to, I guess educate would be the proper term, but parents need to be more involved in knowing what your child is being exposed to at school. It's your responsibility as a parent. I don't think it would take me 30 minutes after I walk in and I see that they have blue hair and piercings and a transgender pride flag on the wall. I think I'd be walking out within the first 10 seconds like, nope. That being said, that's absolutely, you're right. So under this bill, you could go to the administration and you could say, hey, listen, I don't want my child in that class. And they'll say, well, go screw yourself. Fine. It's public school. They're going to be in that class regardless. If that's the case, then private school is always an option. But they'll be like, okay, we'll transfer him from the blue-haired feminist into the red-haired feminist room. Does that work for you? I know you don't like the color blue. Well, then, attend that parent-teacher conference. You're going to get a read pretty quick. 100%. But, private school is always an option. But if we can... Yeah, and if we can get... this is, I mean, at the very least, you have to view this as a foot in the door. You have to. This is a foot in the door. This is a step in the right direction. It may not have been as big of a step as you personally would have liked, but ultimately we're moving in the right direction here. So make sure you are also running for school board. That is very important. It is filled with leftists. They set the policies here.
Yes.
There's not a lot we can do about the teachers and the superintendents, but you can at least look at some of the materials that they're pushing through into your school. There is video after video after video of these parents pointing out sexual content active in the library and in the classrooms to these children where they're being indoctrinated. But to me, I say this is a big L. You say it's a big W. But I think we both can agree the Swiss have beat us here. There are only two genders. Switzerland rejects gender ideology in new ruling. The government of Switzerland rejected attempts to impose third gender option or no gender option for official records last week, distinguishing itself from other European nations that have already adopted the politics of gender identity. The Swiss Federal Council responded to two proposals from the nation's parliament saying the binary gender model is still strongly anchored in Swiss society. Big W for Switzerland. I still like a big L for us.
Yeah, if that's the I'm not going to say that that's the right path, because obviously you and I are not Swiss people. There's a word I'm looking for that I can't find. Either way, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and, like, from outside of their borders be like, yeah, that's how they should be legislating their country, because I don't know the situation there in Switzerland. But ultimately,
no, I just wish we would do that here.
Yeah, I mean, but if they're, like, we already know that this agenda is dangerous, and it's not necessarily, to me anyway, like, it in moderation, it can be maybe helpful. But we already know that as a whole, this agenda is dangerous.
It is incredibly dangerous. And as the final segment of the show, I'm going to show you something here only because I had to see it. But before we get to that, please follow us on Twitter at America Wake Up if you enjoy this content. And please, if you want to support our content, please consider buying us a cup of coffee. Here's the picture. You've been warned. Shield your children. Get them out of the room. This is freaking disgusting. Here we go. This is a man with fake nipples on, attempting to feed a child, and you can guarantee that milk is sour. Please buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wakeup. What's your thought on this, Devin? Do you like it?
Good for him. He's living his best life.
Living his best life. All right, I'm gonna end on that note. Please pray for Devin. Hashtag pray for Devin. I am your host, Alexander Graves.
Get the child away from him. That's my only gripe. Somebody get the kid away from him. Other than that, good for him.
100%.
Yeah.
Pray for Devin. Yeah. I'm your host, Alexander Graves, the constitutional conservative. This is my co-host, the half-assed libertarian Zoomer, Devin Adler, and I hope you guys appreciated this. Stay safe, keep around in the chamber, and watch your back. Signing off.